I was staring at the logic validator engine for Echelon Core, the primary transaction router for Stratovolve, when the calendar invite popped up. HR meeting, mandatory attendance, immediate. There was no subject line, no warning, just one of those clinical little pings that carries the weight of a guillotine. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my hands hovering over the mechanical keyboard, before I finally locked my screen and walked to the fifth floor. The HR hallway always smelled like cold coffee, sterile carpet cleaner, and freshly printed disappointment. When I walked into the room, Preston Miller, our newly appointed CEO, was already seated at the polished conference table. He was 42 years old, wore tailored suits that looked like they belonged in a corporate lifestyle magazine, and possessed the kind of sharp cheekbones and practiced charisma that made you feel like you were being sold something you did not want. He was a man who believed that spreadsheet numbers could fully replace human ingenuity, and his entire career had been built on cutting costs rather than building value. Two HR representatives flanked him like silent guards. One of them, a woman named Sarah, gave me a polite, rehearsed smile that people usually reserve for putting down a sick pet. Sarah was nervously shuffling papers, and the other representative was staring intently at his tablet. They knew this was a betrayal, but they were paid to execute Preston's decisions. Preston leaned forward, folding his hands like he was auditioning for a community theater production. He started by saying this was not going to be easy, which in corporate speak always meant it would be excruciating for me. He went on to explain that in light of the upcoming 300 million acquisition deal with a European consortium and our efforts to streamline operational costs, the company was reevaluating core engineering roles. Stratovolve had once been a place of innovation, but under Preston's leadership, it had quickly transformed into a sterile corporate machine where developers were viewed as simple utility expenses. I sat there in silence and just blinked. My name is Julian Croft. I am 50 years old, and I have been the senior systems architect at Stratovolve for 16 years. I had been here longer than the desk chairs, longer than the corporate logo on the glass wall. I had written the first line of code for Echelon Core when the company was just 6 people in a cramped loft. Echelon Core was the backbone of Stratovolve's operations. It was designed to route and process millions of transaction requests in real time, serving as the main traffic controller for global supply chain clients. Without it, the company's software suite was completely useless. I did not just build a component, I built the entire digital engine that made the company valuable. Yet here was Preston, explaining that my current position overlapped with several new strategic initiatives. He told me that effective immediately, my salary would be adjusted downward by 30%. He assured me this was not a reflection of my performance, but simply a necessary step to make the company leaner. It was the standard translation for being told I was too expensive, middle-aged, and in the way. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or point out that their shiny 300,000 acquisition was built entirely on my architecture. I simply signed the salary adjustment paperwork, looked Preston dead in the eyes, and gave him a calm, slow smile. It was the kind of smile you give to someone who thinks they have won a game you invented. Then I stood up, walked out, and went back to my desk. That afternoon, the company's Slack channel exploded with messages welcoming Dustin Foley, the new VP of Technical Architecture. Dustin was 29 years old, wore expensive leather loafers without socks, and introduced himself in the all-hands meeting as a disruptor of legacy systems. He referred to Echelon Core as an elegant old car that needed a hot rod engine. I sat in the back of the room, listening to him throw out buzzwords about scalable synergy, and felt my stomach turn. Within 2 days, they had given Dustin my corner office. My badge access to the deployment servers was revoked. As part of what they called security restructuring, my administrative permissions were quietly removed. I received a polite email from the IT department thanking me for my past contributions and requesting that I assist Dustin with the knowledge transfer. Apparently, I was now officially classified as legacy knowledge. It was a strange space between humiliation and complete absurdity. They did not just sideline me, they buried my entire career under a corporate press release. But I did not complain. I did not start a public war. Instead, I opened a private document on my personal drive and began collecting timestamps, access logs, and system triggers. I was not plotting immediate revenge. I was simply documenting reality. When a complex building is about to collapse, you want to know exactly which support beam cracked first. I sat at my new desk, which was a cramped wooden table near the noisy copy machine, and watched Dustin's team butcher modules they did not understand. They were patching over core frameworks that had taken me years to perfect, placing simple bandages over ticking logic bombs. Yet I continued to smile. Deep down in a secure folder on a drive that no one at Stratovolve could access, I had a PDF. It was a provisional patent filing submitted 2 years ago under my name as the sole inventor. The company had refused to pay for the filing, claiming it was too expensive. Now they were trying to sell a $300,000 Zeozozen system that they did not actually own. And I had exactly 14 days left to decide what to do with it. The transition of Echelon Core under Dustin's new management was nothing short of a digital demolition derby. I sat at my makeshift desk, the persistent clack and hum of the copy machine serving as the soundtrack to my professional exile. Dustin had officially renamed our core repositories to Dustin Core on the team dashboards, a move so petty it almost made me laugh. He was a master of corporate showmanship, but he possessed a dangerous ignorance of the system's actual plumbing. When he walked past my desk, he would throw a casual nod my way and say something like, "Still hanging in there." Legacy knowledge before ducking into the main conference room to host another strategy meeting. I did not correct him. I did not remind him that Echelon Core did not run on Synergy. It ran on a complex transaction validator that I had spent 5 years coding. Instead, I quietly watched the system logs, noting each time his developers pushed an unstable update that chipped away at the system's integrity. It was a Tuesday evening when I finally met Gerald Vance for a drink. The rain was slicking the sidewalks outside a quiet, dimly lit bar on 7th Street, the kind of place where you order whiskey neat and the bartender does not ask for your life story. Gerald had been my mentor at Stratovolve for a decade. He was a brilliant, gray-haired engineer who had left the company 3 years ago when the board brought in outside venture capitalists who spoke in empty slogans. He had seen the writing on the wall long before I did. I remembered the long nights spent in the old office, drinking stale energy drinks and staring at monitors that felt like they were burning holes in our retinas. Gerald had been the one who taught me to write defensive code, to assume that everything would eventually fail and that I needed to build safety gates. As I sat down opposite him, he slid a napkin across the table and looked at me with a mixture of concern and knowing amusement. "You look like you have been run over by a freight train," Gerald said, taking a sip of his drink. I let out a dry laugh. "They cut my salary by 30% last week," I told him. "And they brought in a 29-year-old VP who thinks JSON is a type of protein shake to replace me. They told me my role was redundant." Gerald did not flinch. He just raised a single eyebrow and leaned forward. "Let me guess," he said. "They are trying to package Echelon Core for the European acquisition, and they want to clean up the ledger by cutting the expensive old guard." I nodded. "That is exactly it. They think they can just copy the code and discard the architect." Gerald smiled, a sharp, cold expression that I had seen him use in boardroom battles years ago. "You still hold the provisional patent on the validator, do you not?" The question hit me like a splash of cold water. I had almost forgotten about it. The memory came rushing back. 2 years ago, when I first finalized the validator engine, I had realized how valuable it was. The validator was the brainstem of Echelon Core. It analyzed and authenticated every transaction request before allowing the system to execute. It prevented data corruption and system deadlock under massive operational loads. I had gone to Stratovolve's legal department, requesting that the company file a patent application to protect it. The lead attorney had patted me on the back and told me that patent filings were cost-prohibitive for non-priority features. They wanted to save their legal budget for marketing trademarks. Gerald had pulled me aside afterward in the hallway. He told me that if the company was too blind to see the value of the validator, I should protect myself. He told me to file the provisional patent independently and pay for it out of my own pocket. So, I did. I hired an external patent attorney and quietly filed the application. I listed myself as the sole inventor. The external patent attorney had cost me $5,000, which was a significant amount of money for me at the time. I had hidden the invoice from my wife, telling myself it was just insurance for my hard work. Now, looking at the active portal, I realized that investment was the only thing standing between my dignity and complete corporate erasure. The company never asked about it, and I never brought it up. I went back to doing my job, and the paperwork sat in a digital archive. I pulled out my phone, opened the browser, and logged into the federal patent portal. My fingers moved automatically through the security prompts. I searched the active filings. There it was. Application number 62,885,412. Authenticated logic validator for dynamic logistics systems. Inventor, Julian Croft. Status, active, days remaining 14 days. I stared at the screen as the number registered in my mind. I had exactly 14 days left before the provisional patent expired. If I did not convert it into a utility patent, the protection would vanish and the logic would enter the public domain. But if I did convert it, I would have a legally binding hammer. I looked up at Gerald, my phone screen reflecting in my eyes. They never asked me to sign over the intellectual property, I whispered. They do not even know it exists because they never read the backup documentation in the commit logs. Gerald's grin widened. Then Preston Miller is trying to sell a 300,000 platform that his company does not actually own. You have a nuclear trigger in your pocket, Julian. What are you going to do with it? The next morning, I met Diana Thorne at a small bakery on the corner of 4th Street. Diana was a sharp, no-nonsense patent attorney who had helped me file the provisional application 2 years ago. She wore thick blue-rimmed glasses and possessed the calm, unblinking gaze of someone who spent her life dissecting corporate lies. I slid the folder containing my employment contract and the patent documents across the table. She did not say a word for the first 10 minutes, simply turning the pages as she sipped her black coffee. She stopped on page 6 of the licensing addendum. I watched her eyes trace the lines of Clause 9F. I had forgotten the exact wording we had used, but I remembered that Diana had insisted on inserting it. It was a standard piece of academic boilerplate, the kind of clause independent researchers used when universities try to monetize their inventions without giving them credit. Diana looked up, her expression serious. Clause 9F is very clear, Julian, she said. It states that if the sole inventor is terminated, demoted, or reassigned to a different role without cause, any and all licensing rights granted to the company for the protected logic will automatically revert to the inventor within 72 hours. I took a slow sip of my tea. They cut my salary by 30%. They took my office, and they officially reassigned me to QA support under a new supervisor, I said. Does that trigger the clause? Diana let out a soft laugh. It does not just trigger it, it obliterates their license, she replied. The salary reduction is a material demotion, and the role change is an involuntary reassignment without cause. Since you paid for the provisional application out of pocket and never signed an intellectual property assignment agreement, the validator logic belongs to you, not Stratovolve. Diana adjusted her glasses and pointed to a subclause in Clause 9F. This is your leverage, Julian, because you filed the provisional application before they even drafted your current employment contract. The validator logic was never considered company property. They cannot argue it was a work for hire because the filing date precedes the contract's signature by 3 weeks. The moment we convert this provisional application into a full utility patent and serve them the notice, the 72-hour countdown begins. If they continue to run any system that utilizes YALA validator logic after that window, they are committing federal patent infringement under 35 U.S.C. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the revelation. Under 35 U.S.C. paragraph 284, we can seek an immediate injunction to stop their system from running, plus treble damages for willful infringement, Diana continued. Furthermore, if they tried to forge your signature on an assignment agreement to save themselves, that would be forgery under California Penal Codes, Section 470, making the assignment void ab initio. They cannot complete a $300,000 zero-zen acquisition if their core product is subject to a federal injunction. It would render the entire deal void ab initio. They would be selling stolen goods. I sat there as the digital clock on the bakery wall ticked. I did not want to destroy the company, but I wanted my dignity back. I had given 16 years of my life to Stratovolve, and they had treated me like an expired printer cartridge. They wanted to make me legacy knowledge, so I decided to show them just how critical that legacy was. "Let us file the utility patent," I said. Diana nodded, a cold professional smile appearing on her face. "I will submit the conversion documents to the patent office today. Once the filing is processed, I will draft the official notice of license revocation. We will give them exactly 72 hours to comply." We spent another hour discussing the exact mechanics of the filing, ensuring that every detail was watertight. Diana pointed out that because I had kept meticulous records of my personal expenditures for the initial filing, there was zero basis for the company to claim they had funded the invention. While Diana prepared the legal paperwork, the atmosphere back at the Stratovolve office reached a fever pitch. Preston Miller was hosting lavish pre-acquisition lunches, and the hallways were decorated with banners welcoming our European partners. A countdown clock was projected on the wall in the main lobby, marking the days, hours, and minutes until the final signing ceremony on Friday. Dustin Foley was running around the office, bragging about how his new updates would make Echelon Core run 50% faster. He had no idea that his updates were actually destabilizing the logic flow, and that the only thing keeping the system from crashing was the validator engine I had built. I sat at my small table by the copy machine, completely invisible to the executives. My name had been removed from the project slide decks, and I had been excluded from the celebration dinners. But I did not care. I spent my afternoon backing up my local documentation and removing my personal annotations from the shared code repositories. They wanted the shell of Echelon Core, so I was leaving them exactly that. No instructions, no maps, and no help. The system was about to lose its heart, and the clock was ticking. I watched the interns running back and forth with trays of food and marketing brochures, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing. Preston stood near the glass balcony, laughing with investors, his $3,000 watch catching the overhead light. They all looked so secure in their success, believing they had easily sidelined the one person who actually understood how Echelon Core worked. By Wednesday morning, the utility patent conversion was officially registered. Diana Thorne wasted no time. She sent the formal notice of license revocation via certified mail and electronic delivery directly to Stratovolve's legal department. It was a dense 10-page document citing the patent filing, the terms of Clause 9F, and the immediate 72-hour countdown. However, I knew how the company operated. Their legal team was currently overwhelmed with the massive stack of acquisition contracts for the 300 million buyout. A notice about an independent patent filing from an employee they had sidelined was bound to sit in a general inbox, unread and ignored. They simply did not believe that legacy knowledge could bite back. I went back to my desk near the copy machine and began the final phase of my plan. The validator engine was not just a static gatekeeper. It was designed with a built-in compliance heartbeat. Every 72 hours, the engine would automatically pulse, sending an encrypted query to the external patent registry ledger to verify that the licensing credentials were valid and active. I had written this compliance check years ago to protect my work, and it was a core dependency of Echelon Core. It didn't output any logs to the standard console unless it failed, meaning Dustin and his team had no idea it existed. They had never even looked at the validation source code, choosing instead to focus on building a flashy user interface. If the heartbeat check failed to receive a valid confirmation, the validator would execute its safety protocol. It would refuse to authorize any incoming data stream, effectively locking down the entire transaction router. The next scheduled compliance check was set for Friday morning at 6 a.m., exactly 3 hours before the live demonstration with the European buyers. I opened the patent verification portal on my personal laptop, using my secure developer credentials. The interface was outdated, with slow loading times and gray buttons, but it was the only system that mattered. I navigated to the license database for Echelon Core, selected Stratovolve systems, and changed the authorization status from active to revoked. There was no warning siren, no flashing red lights on my screen. But deep within Echelon Core's codebase, the clock began to run. On Thursday, the office was buzzing with manic energy. Dustin Foley was frantically pushing new builds to the staging servers. He had named the final release Dustin Core Final, hoping to stamp his name permanently on the project before the buyout. I watched the system logs from my laptop and saw that the staging build was throwing hundreds of validation warnings. Dustin's team had stripped away several memory buffers, thinking they were redundant, which caused the transaction flow to bottleneck. The only thing preventing the system from collapsing was the validator engine, which was working overtime to reroute the corrupted data. I wrote a warning note about the buffer errors and left it on Dustin's desk. When he saw it, he simply laughed and tossed it into the recycling bin. "We do not need your legacy advice. Julian," he said, "we are going live tomorrow, and the buyers want speed, not caution." One of the junior developers, a young guy whom I had mentored for 2 years, walked over to my desk after Dustin left. He looked nervous, checking over his shoulder to see if Dustin was watching. "Julian, the staging logs are looking really messy," he whispered. I tried to tell Dustin about the validation warnings, but he told me to ignore them. He said Echelon Core is modular enough to handle it. Is it safe? I looked at the developer, feeling a pang of sympathy. He was a good kid, but he was caught in a corporate machine. "The validator will do exactly what it is programmed to do," I told him gently. "You should just make sure your own code commits are clean and documented. Do not take responsibility for Dustin's modifications." He nodded slowly, seeming to understand the subtext, and returned to his station. I did not argue. I just smiled my quiet, cold smile. That afternoon I packed my notebooks, my favorite coffee mug that I had received for my 10-year anniversary at the firm, and my personal hard drives into my bag. I stood up from my cramped desk by the copier, took a final look at the busy office floor, and walked out. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I drove straight to the airport, checked in for a one-way flight to Lisbon, and boarded the plane. As the aircraft climbed into the gray sky, I powered off my phone and placed it in my bag. I was leaving the country and I was leaving Stratavolve to face the consequences of their own decisions. They had spent weeks convincing themselves that they did not need the architect who built the foundation of their success. They had stripped my name from the slides and cut my pay by 30%. Now, they were about to discover what Echelon Core looked like without the validator engine. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the jet engines. For the first time in 16 years, I felt a deep, uninterrupted sense of peace, knowing that my value was no longer theirs to exploit. Friday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of a scheduled execution. In the main boardroom of Stratavolve, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive catering and nervous energy. Preston Miller stood at the head of the conference table, his tie perfectly knotted, adjusting his cuffs. The European acquisition team from Munich had dialed into the video link, their serious faces displayed on the massive wall-mounted screens. Dustin Foley stood next to the presentation monitor, holding a protein shake and gesturing confidently. He was ready to launch the live demonstration of Echelon Core, showing how the system could process 10,000 simultaneous logistics transactions without a single delay. But at 6 a.m., 3 hours before the meeting, Echelon Core's validator engine had executed its scheduled compliance heartbeat. It had pulsed its encrypted query to the external ledger, searching for Stratavolve's authorization. The ledger had returned a null response. True to its design, the validator had immediately triggered its lockdown protocol. It refused to validate any incoming commands, freezing the transaction router. When Dustin clicked the launch button at 9:05 a.m., the system did not respond. The sleek user interface loaded, but the transaction counter remained stuck at 0. A loading icon spun on the screen like a drunk ballerina. Dustin forced a chuckle, his fingers tapping rapidly on his keyboard. "Just a minor caching delay," he said, forcing a smile. "We will have it up in a second." He initiated a full system reboot, but the reboot did not fix the problem. Echelon Core's fallback scripts were programmed to route all traffic through the validator, and since the validator was locked down, the entire system remained deadlocked. The screen refreshed, and a single clinical error message appeared in the developer console: "License trust chain invalid. Root authority required." Preston's smile faded. "What is that, Dustin?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Dustin's face turned the color of a microwave tomato. "I do not know," he stammered. "It is probably a legacy bug from the old system." The tech lead, who had worked under me for 4 years, looked at the console and spoke up. "It is not a bug," he said quietly. "We have lost validator trust. The system does not believe it has the legal license to run." The lead buyer from Munich leaned closer to his camera, his expression darkening. The Munich buyers were known for their strict due diligence, and they did not tolerate amateur errors. "What do you mean the system does not have permission to run?" he asked. "Is this platform not proprietary and fully owned by Stratavolve?" Preston scrambled to salvage the call. "Of course it is," he insisted. "This is just a temporary technical artifact. We will resolve it immediately." He turned to the HR manager. "Get Julian Croft in here right now," he snapped. HR immediately sent a flurry of Slack messages, emails, and phone calls. But they received nothing but silence. My desk near the copy machine was empty. My security badge was sitting on top of my keyboard. At that exact moment, I was sitting on a sunny balcony in Lisbon, enjoying a hot cup of espresso. My phone was powered off, resting at the bottom of my bag. I had no signal, no Wi-Fi, and no interest in their panic. Back in the office, the legal team had finally retrieved Diana Thorne's certified notice from the inbox. The general counsel read the document, his face draining of all color. He walked into the boardroom and pulled Preston aside, whispering the reality into his ear. "Julian Croft filed an independent patent on the validator logic," the attorney muttered. "Under Clause 9F of his agreement, our license was revoked 72 hours ago due to his salary reduction and demotion. If we run Echelon Core right now, we are committing willful patent infringement under 35 U.S.C. 271. We do not own the core technology." The buyer's legal team, having overheard the frantic whispers, did not wait. Within 20 minutes, they sent an official email halting the acquisition. The 300,000 deal was dead. They cited a material breach of the term sheet due to unresolved intellectual property disputes. The boardroom collapsed into absolute chaos. Dustin Foley sat in his chair, staring blankly at the screen. The reality of the situation had finally pierced his confidence, and he began to cry quietly, tears running down his face. Preston Miller sat back, looking at his expensive watch as if it could buy back the time he had wasted. In Lisbon, I opened my laptop and checked the tech news. The headlines were already appearing. Stratavolve acquisition collapses over patent dispute. The next day, the company's stock value plummeted by 45% in over-the-counter trading. I opened my inbox and saw 25 unread messages. 5 were from Preston, begging me to call him. 3 were from board members, offering to restore my salary and give me stock options. The rest were from competing logistics firms, offering me consulting contracts to help them build their own systems. I did not reply to Preston. I simply deleted his emails, closed my laptop, and took a slow sip of my coffee. The validator had done its job, the system was silent, and I was finally free.